Hello, my name is Mac Wilson from The Current, and I am joined via the power of the internet by Mr. Colin Meloy. Hello, Colin.
Hello, Mac. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Colin Meloy of the Decemberists. I'm glad that we finally had the chance to touch base. The Decemberists have always had a special place in my heart because the first time that The Current ever did a top 89 poll at year end, the first time we did it was in 2006 when The Crane Wife was voted the number one album of the year by current listeners. So you have a spot in current history as well.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Thank you, current listeners. That's really sweet.
So
From 2006.
from 2006 and on now, as we've continued playing your music all through the years, diving into all the different eras of the band, the 20 plus year history of the band as you are commemorating over this summer. Colin, I wanted to start out today by noting sort of this weird bit of energy from the universe to the point where I feel like our simulation is glitching. As one of the
Mm.
principal architects behind the record "The King Is Dead," today is the day that Prince Philip in the UK has passed away at the age of 99. I'm sure that's
Mm.
not lost on you, but of all days to be talking to you for the very first time, it lines up very strange.
The death of royalty. Yeah, I guess he was the consort, not the king. So, but there's a connection there.
It's probably the closest that we'll ever get to say that as well, because yes, he was not the king, but it's close enough.
It'll be a few years.
We were thinking about the 20-year anniversary of the Decemberists, and The King Is Dead. That album actually commemorated its 10th anniversary earlier this winter, and I went back to revisit it lately, and it holds up as just a really terrific rock album all the way
Mm.
through. I think that it's held up really well over time. Do you feel like it has a special place in the Decemberists catalog? Do you think that it stands out one way or the other? Are there any special memories that you had of that album as it passed the 10-year mark?
Yeah, I have lots of memories of that album. I mean, in my mind, I don't know how much is embraced by our fan base. I think that probably to some people's minds, it was sort of a, maybe it would be seen as more of a it was certainly our most commercial record. I'll say that much. And it is our best selling record. It's a gold record now. And it was a number one record when it came out. So in many ways, it feels like this big turning point in our career, in a career that had been building for a long time. It's not like it came out of nowhere. We'd been a band for a while at that point. But I do remember, I have fond memories and some difficult memories of that. Certainly, the writing of that record was really enjoyable because I think I had just come out of writing the stuff we had written and recorded and toured Hazards of Love and all those like kind of dark and weird and sad and children being killed and people drowning and stuff like that in that record. And I think I was working out some demons. And I think I came out the other end of that with a completely different perspective. And I remember thinking as I was working on songs of The King Is Dead, it's like, I just want to write some songs that are nice to listen to, that are, good folk, like kind of going back and not trying to sort of mine the depths of my sort of anguish, instead like try to find the joy. And it just moved to a house in Forest Park, this big forested park in Portland. We were surrounded by trees just out in the woods, and really sweet little house, and I just had a completely different perspective. I think it's so a lot of those songs come from that, and I have a fond memory of writing them. And then we had this grand idea, because for whatever reason, I'm forever like trying to emulate what the Waterboys did with Fisherman's Blues. I have these weird ideas of like going places and recording in strange spots. Like they had recorded at this manor house in Ireland, and I thought, well, why don't these are kind of country songs? Why don't we go to the country to record them and record them all in a barn? So we made Tucker Martine, our engineer, basically move his entire studio to like this drafty old barn with no insulation at the beginning of summer. And we had this idea that we would record in this barn and we would sleep on the property. We would sleep in tents and things like that. But it rained the entire, like, it rained so hard. Most of the time we were there. There was a few moments, glimmering moments of sunshine, and then it was like so stifling hot. It was hard to even be in the barn. I think it was really a difficult, challenging recording process, but we got it done.
It's funny what you said about the record. On one hand, it's sort of not necessarily embraced by your fan base, and yet it's your top selling record. I hadn't thought about this connection before, but I keep going back to like when the Grateful Dead put out Touch of Grey in the late 1980s, and then Neil Young put out Rockin' in the Free World in the late 1980s, like early 90s. Like those are not necessarily held up by their fan bases as their best, but they're some of their most enduring tunes in a really, really positive way. And I think that King is Dead, you could probably slot them in a similar category with that.
Comparing it to the Touch of Grey. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks
I am. I'm comparing it to Touch of Grey and Rockin' in the Free World. That's good. That's good company
I'll
to
take
be
the
in.
Rockin' in the Free World.
I'm talking with Colin Meloy of the Decemberists via the power of the internet. And I actually had a question about the hazards of love. My impression of the record at the time, I remember thinking, if I can figure out what this is all a metaphor for, I feel like I'm going to unlock it and it's going to come alive in a whole new light. And I because it was written at the very, very tail end of the Bush administration, I could never figure out if there was a political bent or if there was some really big metaphor that I was missing. I feel like we're a decade on. Are you willing to divulge whether there really is like an even deeper political or socio-political metaphor to the plot line of The Hazards of Love?
Socio-political. No, I know there's none at all. I mean, whatever is there, would be unintentional and certainly left up to the listener to find that, which doesn't mean to say that that's not there. The hazards of, if there's any kind of key to unlocking the hazards of love, it's just that I had this idea of a concept, like I was just listening to a lot of old British folk music at the time from the British folk revival, like the 60s and 70s, Anne Briggs and Nick Jones and Shirley Collins. I was just like steeped in this stuff. It was all I was listening to. And I was noticing all these through lines and like characters that kept showing up in these songs. And sometimes they had the same name, or sometimes they were just sort of archetypal. A lot of Margarets and Williams making their way through old British folk music. And I thought it would be interesting, sort of in the way that like Stephen Sondheim made Into the Woods, like sort of stitching all of these fairy tales together to make a story. Like, what if you took these the folk song archetypes and strung them together and see what kind of story you could make? And that's really where that came from. So if anything, it is completely removed from any kind of socio-political intention.
Okay. That makes sense.
There you go. Sorry to shut you down on that, but there you go.
You didn't shut me down. I shut you down. I'm sorry, Colin. It's we can kind of talk about the idea of a solid year now of doing these sessions. I'm so used to, in years of working at the current, like, okay, we're going to go down the hall. You're going to meet the band. You're going to shake their hands. And then they're going to play a song. You're going to chat about the record for a bit. Then they're going to play another song, et cetera, et cetera. And doing sessions and conversations like that. And we've been doing things very differently over the last year or so. The way that we are chatting now via Zoom, is this largely the way that you have done things? Have you sort of shaken up the way that you've had conversations, whether with media or other folks, or is this basically the format that you have had these conversations?
Yeah, it's all Zoom. It's all one Zoom configuration or another, it seems like. I feel like technology is kind of has changed. There's some ways that make it easier, some ways that make it harder. I've certainly dialed in just being able to kind of do music, online a little bit easier, and better since the beginning of the pandemic. But other than that, this is what it's been. Yeah.
So, Colin, the Decemberists had been scheduled to hit the road, and you've postponed that tour, which is a shame, obviously, but it is it's done with the best intentions for the safety of everyone involved. And the band will be doing a series of live streams over the rest of the spring, which is really exciting news, as each of the sets is going to have its own unique set list therein. You want to take us a little bit behind the scenes on what you've got in store for these live streams happening later in the spring?
Yeah, well, they are basically kind of probably what we would have ended up doing in a very compressed form during the tour, during the 20th anniversary tour, in that they are three unique sets mining from every dusty corner of our career. And there are probably a lot more deep cuts in there than you would, there's some things that have been left out that may be like sort of live staples, but I kind of put the set list together wanting to kind of have it be this sort of massive overview, like no stone unturned. And there's only so much you can do with that much material, but I feel like it's pretty broad. And I think that the sort of the casual fan who knows like a couple records or a couple songs, there's stuff for that too. But then there's a lot for the fans that have been there with us, I think, from the beginning.
So I just thought of something. As you're doing these shows via the internet, it's not necessarily a traditional encore anymore. So you don't necessarily need to save O Valencia until the very end of the set. You could theoretically put that anywhere that you wanted. Do you take that into consideration, or do you still want it to seem like, okay, we're going to save some of the big hits for the end?
That's a good question. There's a VIP show, sort of an after show with 3 extra songs. And I think those are kind of like an encore, sort of. But yeah, we just kind of, there's only I've done a live stream. There's only so much you can do. You don't want to have people sitting in front of their screens for too long. It's not like a live show where you're in the venue. And I think a little bit goes a long way. But yeah, and so structuring the set list, it's not ideal. I'll go out and say that, like, I really prefer playing in front of people, and I'm sure that people will prefer being in an audience. And because you can't have that sort of energy back and forth, which sometimes will change the set list up, or just like as the set list mounts, it gets more exciting. But I think we do a pretty good job in emulating that experience as best as we can.
We're talking with Colin Meloy of the Decemberists about the web stream live shows that are coming up later in the spring. Colin, I had another question about I don't know if you would consider it a deep cut or not, from the 2000s, your tune, Valerie Plame, where when you released it, everybody is like, okay, that kind of makes sense that the Decemberists would write a song about Valerie Plame. But, we're almost 15 years later now, and there's this actual sense of historical discovery as you listen to that song, like, oh, right, that was one of those strange scandals from the Bush administration. And it got me thinking about the Bush years versus the Trump years, whether if someone released a song about some figure from some scandal from the Trump administration, if they put that song out now, I think it would be met with a very different reaction than when Valerie Plame came out back in the day. And I'm curious I'm curious what you think about sort of the differences, and as odd as it sounds, the differences between the two administrations that would make one more likely to have a song written about it than the other.
That's a good question. To be honest, the reason I had gone with Valerie Plame, the cadence of her name, Valerie Plame, it just really lent itself to song, and so it kind of built from there. But yeah, there's this whole imagined version of this espionage thing. I think in the Trump administration, there's no romance in any of those people. Like, there's no extraordinary backstory that you could bring into a song. I was actually thinking about that, like, whoever, and I'm sure that the backroom studios are talking about this, making a film of the Trump administration. Like, you don't want to cast any of that. You don't want to portray these people because they're grotesqueries. They're all just hollow human beings, and so there's really nothing there to mine for us that I'd be interested in mining for a song.
It's interesting to think about. I got to go back and revisit that one. We're talking with Colin Meloy of the Decemberists, and you've got the shows coming up. Have you, as a band, stayed busy in other ways, whether writing or recording, over the last year during the pandemic? Is there more music in the works, or have you put that on hold for the time being?
Well, I'm always writing music. I was actually right when the lockdown happened last year, I was working on a draft of a novel that I just sold a novel. So I'm still working on that and about to dive into the final draft, I think. And so that has really taken up my time, which is kind of lucky because I'm glad that we didn't have a bunch of new material we were excited about and we were about to release a record, because that would be so heartbreaking. And like, I feel for all the bands out there who are, in the midst of their, the beginning of their career, or just like excited about the material and want to start a record cycle going. It's a shitty time, or excuse me, a bad time to be doing that. But power to them for going ahead. I'm sort of thankful that we were in this kind of pause, and we were going to do this 20th anniversary tour, but it's not like it's going to make or break our career doing that. So what we've been doing, I've been writing on the side music. We've been keeping in touch, and we've done this, and it was really fun to get back together with everybody and play music. But that's about it. And what's in the future, I can't really say. I don't really know. I can't really say.
Colin, I've got one more last question for you. Whether at these web streams that you're doing or live music in the future, you've got a couple of songs in your catalog that, given what everybody has been through over the last year, I'm curious what the audience reaction will be, whether it's everything is awful or we all die young. Do you think it's going to be one of those where your audience is going to want to hear those actively at every single show, or do you think they'll want to put it in the rearview mirror? What do you foresee?
I think those songs are done. I think I may retire those songs. Those songs were written before all this went down. Even when I did have a dire outlook on the world, and little did I know just how more awful things have become, to the point where it's absurd. And I don't know that I want to revisit those songs myself. We'll see.
Okay, fair enough. We're chatting with Colin Meloy of the Decemberists. We are looking forward to the live streams, and we're looking forward to seeing you back in person and online, one way or the other, in the future. Colin, thank you for taking the time out of your day today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.